Howdy folks, welcome to the Scannell Agenda. Today's date is June 6, 2017. This is show number 66, A Tough Row to Hoe, Part 2. Now I left off discussing the article here, which is in the Cape Cod Times, Saturday, June 3rd, 2017. It's an op-ed piece by Sheriff Cummings, James M. Cummings, Sheriff of Barnstable County. And I was taking issue, no one else would take issue with this point. It's a very basic point. Throughout the political spectrum is near total agreement that jail is not the ideal place for those suffering from mental illness. Well, I take issue. I think it is an ideal place. And I say some of the guards that I've known in my lifetime, from what I've seen them in action, they proved that they were the best caregivers and that these guys were being ideally handled. They had work, they had good food. In the old days we had the farm there, very good milk. Oh. And no shortage of the food, no shortage of a good cheer at the dinner table either. We ate pretty well. But these guys, most of them worked really hard too. They were working on this or that. Now how, it goes on here, how did correctional facilities become the dumping ground for the nation's mentally ill and addicted? And of course I would agree to the question. Dumping ground, I mean, when you're young and you've gotten off track and maybe your family wasn't too tightly wrapped and you were a little bit of a loose end and you got off the track and judge threw you in jail for 30 days or a little bit. That's not such a bad thing. County jail, okay. So I wouldn't say your county jails were dumping grounds. I'd say they're a little timeout, mostly for guys. But I say, oh, it's ideal. It's wonderful. Jail is wonderful. Jail is good. And it's got to be done right. And what makes jail good and wonderful are the good and wonderful guards under a proper system and under the proper shepherding of the sheriff, let's say, and with a good program. And again, I don't like the fact that we had a lot of, what I saw was an increase, a drastic increase in the numbers of city fellers coming down here, and then they move on to the Cape, and we don't need that element moving to Cape Cod. I mean, dealing with our own should be quite enough. Thank you very much. We don't want to express an interest in taking on the criminals and barbarians of New Bedford and Brockton and Boston and the city tough guys. And I've known some of those guys, and if you let them out and put them on Cape Cod, they'd have a field day. And that's why I objected. You know, Cape Cod is a nice place, and you don't want to ruin it, do you? I hope not. So that's a side bit of policy there that doesn't really relate to this article. But maybe it does in a tangential way, because, you know, if you bring in a drug dealer and he moves into the Cape area and he's got all his friends, his jailbird friends that he knows and all his contacts, you're doing a disservice to the citizens. Someone's going to get clobbered, and it's going to be the fault of the policy, more or less. Let me go on here. How did correctional facilities become the dumping ground? Well, it might be the cart before the horse, because we have been in this country mollycoddling people that we have forced to spend a lot of money on in our social services. And I always objected to that. You know, they should be put to work and they should dry out while they're working in a county jail. That's wonderful. That's my prescription for the problems. It's not a bad thing to go to jail, especially if you're going to dry out and shape up and read a few books and go to a little bit of schooling and go to church perhaps on Wednesday night or Sunday. There's everything you need there to shape up if it's run well. And I haven't been in there in a long time. I hope I don't have to go back again. I'm going to court pretty soon. But I'm innocent. As many of us remember, mentally ill individuals were treated in so-called mental hospitals. And I had a good friend, Jimmy John Capricorn, who was murdered. They let him out. He wasn't a good friend. He was just an acquaintance. This was in 1978. He was murdered because he went off his nut. He should have been hospitalized. And he was out, and he shouldn't have been let out, and he got murdered. And that was covered up too. Part of my case. Part of the cover-up. You got a cover-up, and then you got a cover-up of the cover-up. While that system was not perfect, facing occasional reports of overcrowding and neglect, our citizens with serious mental illness, health challenges were generally provided a safe place to reside where they received appropriate care. The only appropriate care that I really can vouch for is the clubhouse model. Now, beyond that, if you have to be put away in Taunton State Hospital because you can't follow the rules for some reason, it could be medically, it could be, it could be just that you're not cut out to follow the rules and you don't want to follow the rules and you weren't raised to follow the rules. It could be a lot of different reasons, but the rules have to be followed, and if you don't follow the rules, then you can't maintain a clubhouse way of life and membership, etc., because you're dangerous or something or another, and you have to be put away. Well, that is a shame, but it is necessary. But appropriate care, I believe in different care than is provided for, let's say, in a Taunton State Hospital. I believe more in gated communities where the gate is pretty tall and it's locked, but you've got a community, a real working community with a place to work and, schools, factories, and what have you. And it wouldn't have to necessarily be in the United States of America. I do believe in banishment as a remedy for some people. And they might agree to it too, under the right circumstances. Because the cost of institutionalization is enormous. And that would be a big part of it. But there are other parts of it too. Okay. The deinstitutionalization, back to the article here, of state mental hospitals was arguably a well-intentioned plan following a federal court decision regarding the overcrowding in some state hospitals. Well, of course, Mike Dukakis did it, and it wasn't done right, and it was like all of a sudden, bang, the doors are opened up. Between 1973 and 2010, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health closed 10 public psychiatric hospitals around the state, with their patients returning to the community. The logic at the time was that the use of new psychiatric medications and community-based homes would provide a new and progressive mental health system and rescue the patients from the evils of institutionalization. So, medication is such a complex issue. I don't even want to get into it right now, but I did suggest strongly to NAMI, National Alliance for Mentally Ill, that we on Cape Cod have a peer-reviewed situation available for other people who, I've known many people in my life, and they're just beside themselves complaining about being overly medicated, and that I think can be seen as a crime too, to overly medicate somebody just to shut them up. It's not good. I've been prescribed, but I've never taken anything. Not, why would I? I don't perceive any mental illness. I know I'm a pain in the ass, politically, but, pardon my French, that's not within the sphere of the psychiatry industry. It shouldn't be, but sometimes people do other people favors. Okay, the mass closure of mental health hospitals, back to the article, with nothing more than a new community care concept for the discharged patients has been a disaster on many levels, including the impact on our correctional facilities and the increases in homelessness and addiction. Okay, we definitely have to get back to a firm hand with the loose ends, and to do that you do need the vagrancy rules to be brought back. And I'll add that the most humane way sometimes to handle somebody is to control them, especially if they have mental illness and they're out wandering around in Hyannis. It makes me feel so bad, you know? It does. It makes me feel bad. And you try to get them in there. Over the years, I was known for this. Sometimes it wasn't appreciated. I'd bring in strays, and sometimes they'd take and they'd join. And quite often, it was an accomplishment just to get them in and give them a tour of Bay Bridge, you know, just to give them that seed of an opportunity. But the way to go on the outside is not just to have a clubhouse. It's to have the clubhouses, many different varieties of clubhouses, and especially to have the job and bunk provisions. Because, you know, as I see it, you don't have to be mentally ill necessarily. You could be spiritually disabled, and you could also be down on your luck. You could have a head injury or physically disabled in some way too. There's all kinds of categories, to my thinking, which are not within the parameters of psychiatry. I mean, to be calling someone and diagnosing someone as down on your luck or spiritually disabled, it just doesn't fit in with the shrinks who want to push the pills at all. It doesn't fit in with their little deal. And it is a money deal too going on. Okay, let me get back here. Jails are now the default answer for those Jails are now the default answer for those whose mental illness restricts their ability to follow the rules of society. That can be true, but there's people with mental illness, and I got to say, I've known a lot of people since I've been in the system since 2002 and been a very heavy-duty clubhouse member. There are people that just want to make their own rules, and yes, they have the mental illness, but you don't have to have mental illness to want to just make up your own rules. And you don't want to go by the rules. So if you're such a person and you have mental illness, you belong in jail, and there should be special clubhouses in jail for those of us with mental illness. And I say us because, of course, I'm diagnosed big time. There's no shortage of diagnoses here. And I've got it in spades. I've got 7 or 8, one for each day plus an extra day. I count homicidal as being a mental illness, and I took great offense at that. But there was nothing I could do. Homicidal is not a mental illness. But if you asked anyone else, they'd say, oh, whoa, that's the biggest mental illness you can have. And any such person diagnosed, please take them away, put them away. And I find it hard to disagree with that, as long as you're legitimate in your diagnoses, which these shrinks are not legitimate people in my book. Jails are now the default answer. Okay, can't follow the rules. Follow the rules seems to be a theme. Those nuns used to dictate about following the rules, and they were good at it. And I remember one boy, he got sent back. It was only one case. He got sent back to the public school. He didn't want to follow the rules. Perhaps he couldn't. He was soft as a grape, this kid. And they sent him out of there because they couldn't handle him. They sent him back to the public school. The one and only time case I've ever heard of since I was going to Catholic school that it happened. Correctional facilities were never physically designed, back to the article here, to house the mentally ill. In the past, correctional staff members were not trained to deal with serious mental illness. Now, it's not really about the building physical structure. It's more about your guards and the program. You could have Alcatraz, and you could have a wonderful place to be there at Alcatraz if you had good guards, good homespun, common sense, loving guards who knew how to handle the loose ends coming in and going out, you know. If you had the good guards and a good program, you're all set. And this is why I say it's just so important. It's vital to have clubhouses along with job and a bunk and get people situated properly. Don't just open the door and kick them out. That's ridiculous. You know, this has caused countless problems for the correctional system, including increased danger to the safety of correctional officers and other inmates, and significant financial costs to provide mental health services. Well, a big problem is we listen to these goobers in the psych industry, and they have a good program for them, but the program for them isn't good for people with disabilities, the drug addicts, etc., the criminals. It's not good. Doesn't get them straightened out. Those suffering from serious mental illness are often unable to follow the rules of a jail and often are dangerous to correctional officers. There seems to be a theme in this article here by Chef Cummings, follow the rules, which is a good theme, you know. Other inmates and themselves. Because of security requirements at correctional facilities, mentally ill inmates who cannot follow the basic safety rules often violate institutional rules and find themselves in some form of segregation. That's what we need, is good, loving segregation, knowing someone's got issues and problems and diagnoses, etc. You need your clubhouse people in there, in the jails. You need to transform people, and so therefore you give them the pride of a clubhouse, even if it's in a jail. And the clubhouse pride overtakes the shame of being a defective delinquent or mentally ill. Such violations often lead to the loss of parole and early release opportunities, resulting in mentally ill inmates serving 10 minutes, very good, serving longer than expected sentences. Well then, I totally agree that this would then be part and parcel of you know, the fact that we're not giving people sentences for what they did. We're giving them actually indeterminate sentencing, which was outlawed, but that is what it amounts to. If you're mentally ill and you wind up in jail, your sentence may be indeterminate. You may be held, and they may come up with an excuse to hold you or transfer you somewhere else. It's a scary thing if you're not mentally ill to be put through this too, I can tell you that. If as an activist you're punished with this system, it can be very scary, because they tried to commit me long term, knowing they knew I wasn't mentally ill and I knew I wasn't mentally ill. Boy, it scared the life out of me. It still does. I still have a phobia about that, especially since I'm going to be in the courthouse pretty soon. See, when's that going to be? For some absurd situation. I have a trial date on the 12th for an assault on my beautiful wife, which never happened at all. But they could have me again. I'm really worried about that, because I talk about this Jimmy John Capricorn murder that happened, and then the DNA switch that happened. And oh my God, they got every reason to put me away still, because the people here on Cape Cod can't be moved and can't be pushed. They're just like, we are not good. We're not cutting it. Cape Codders, we're not cutting it. With the codfish, with these social services systems that we have here, we can do better, much better. We should at least be heard and at least have ideas on the table that make sense, such as my ideas. These are anti-establishment ideas, and the establishment makes a lot of money from the psych system and the drugs, too. Let's not forget that. This is part and parcel of establishment profits. I call it the oligarchy. So there's a lot of people that talk about change, and they have no change in mind whatsoever. It's just just yakking. We can make real changes, and with simple policy changes, such as what I'm offering, would be very good for poor and disabled people. Okay, for many reasons, suicide risks for inmates are significantly higher than for the general public. According to published studies, as many as half the suicides in jails across the country are committed by inmates who have underlying serious mental illness. Mentally ill inmates also cost significantly more to house in jail setting as they require increased staffing, suicide monitoring, specialized training for security staff, psychiatric medications, and psychiatric examinations with mental health providers. Suicide is always going to be a problem in any society. You sprinkle in some drugs and alcohol and add to that oppressive political systems that don't help people, and it just escalates. In Barnstable County, to respond to the growing need of mental health services, we have contracted with Correctional Psychiatric Services, this is a company name, to ensure we are identifying and providing appropriate treatment. These additional services are expensive, but the financial, societal, and individual cost of simply warehousing inmates with mental health issues is far greater. Well, I've got the cost-effective methods right here. I'll set you up with all that stuff, folks, from a policy standpoint. And it's as simple as it gets. Town nurse-based system, job and bunk, clubhouse. Clubhouse is not my invention, of course, but it's something that I can see in the context of jails or prisons would be stupendous. Not only are correctional officials required to keep the public safe from our most dangerous criminals, we are also expected to be de facto mental health hospitals and addiction treatment centers. Where's my violin? Because I get my violin too. You know, I don't like being put in a situation with, you know, in front of a judge and, you know, because I'm an activist, okay? It's a tough road to hoe being an activist. And I'm the activist who totally agrees with the judge. That's Judge Carolyn Levine in the ruling of 1954 and Judge Poland. If you really want to scrape down to the nub of it, that's my offense. My offense is that I, Stephen J. Scannell, agreed with the judge on an issue, and I went toe-to-toe with the state and got hammered terribly. So that's my offense. That's why I got the diagnoses. That's why I was put in jail and then, you know, not given a fair trial or really a trial for the, they null pros the case. Once they did do the charges, then they threw it out. They null prosed it. It's ridiculous. So, you know, you're expected to be a nut house, and you're expected to be an addiction center, and you're expected to also be a jail for your loose ends here on the Cape. That I do sympathize with. I feel sorry. But there are better ways for our society to handle this. And this is a good stepping stone, this article. Until the state and federal governments come up with real options to incarceration, hopefully they're my options too. My options would work. I know what would work. because I've been in it. Come up with real options to incarceration for those suffering from serious mental illnesses and addiction. The revolving and expensive door of using correctional facilities as treatment centers will likely continue. So he's throwing out the bait, and I'm taking the bait. Congratulations to Sheriff Cummings for a fine article, fine framing of the issues, and a good takeoff point. Thank you, Sheriff Cummings. Even though we do have our differences, let's say, which I covered in, what show was that? Show number 60, I forget what it was, 59, 2 minutes. Okay, very good. That was on Judge Poland. Okay, so I'm the activist. It's a tough road to hoe. It's tough to be the activist, folks. And it's tough to be the sheriff, too. It's tough. Life is rough. You know, there was a guy, he used to say that every day on the way home, Tom Jameson. He was the funniest guy. He used to say, life is rough. I'm going to beat that woman. And then we'd laugh. We'd all laugh. It was a joke every single time. All right. Well, what can we say? Life is rough. It's a tough road to hoe. All right, thanks for watching the Scannell Agenda.